All right, so what do you think can be done to educate our state on cannabis and kind of clear up some of the, uh, the haze and the issues that surround cannabis?
Yeah, misinformation. Which
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I
The
think.
reefer madness that's still lingering around.
I mean, I can tell you, having kind of been on the front lines of kind of educating my colleagues and, honestly leading the charge in the state on it. I think that, people just don't, they have perceptions, they're difficult to change. I think having a pro-cannabis legalization governor would really help a lot, because then everybody has to listen. I mean, I think that makes a big difference. But the truth is, like, 70% of the state supports it, so it's really an education problem for politicians,
Right.
not so much for the public. That's not with every issue, but I think on this issue specifically, the public has already moved on, and it's the politicians that have to catch up. And so,
That's a good point.
I think that's something that I've been working on for a while. I mean, like, honestly, I can tell you, when I brought the bill in 2021 to legalize cannabis, I think that was the first time that most Republicans and even some Democrats have ever seriously considered, like, this is a policy change that we could implement that would have a serious impact on most of the people that vote for us. It's interesting. I tell people all the time, like, this is the only tax that anybody is begging to pay. Like, there's no other one. Like, the tax on legalized cannabis is one of the only things they're ever begging to pay.
Open up their wallets.
Exactly. And it's $200 million a year, which is not all the money, but it's a significant amount of money for a poor state. I mean, for example, to put that in perspective, we spend $125 million on our entire community and technical college system, right? $125 million a year. So when you're talking about, well, maybe $200 million a year in revenue, you're like, so we could basically provide tuition-free community college to everyone in the state of Louisiana. So
that's pretty powerful.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's enough money to make positive change, I think. And like I said, you could also use it to offset some of the harms. I mean, it's not like it's harmless. It doesn't have any negative effects. But whatever they are, you can offset them with $200 million. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it makes more sense to do that versus what we spend now is like $6,000 per prosecution when somebody gets caught with marijuana, right? Like, I mean, if you don't have a municipality or a cop who just gives you a ticket and fines you $100, it could be that you get some steeper prosecutions that cost $6,000 or more for the state to prosecute, right? Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the day, most of the time they just give you a $250 fine and tell you to go on your way, but it costs the state $6,000 to get there. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense, and I think that most people are on board with that.
Yeah. Do you think the legislators will bring forth another bill to do harm to the hemp industry? And if so, would you be up to veto it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, not that I'm not open to any changes, but I think if it's, hey, we're just going to shut down the market, which I think some of the people definitely, that's their goal was, hey, look, we're going to, this whole thing, we're putting it back in the bottle and throwing it away. I would not allow that to happen.
It's good to hear, because there's thousands of businesses that were created and thousands of jobs. A lot comes from that.
I will tell you, I am a supporter of free markets, individual liberty, and limited government. And
Appreciate
so
that.
those are a consistent, not necessarily all of my conservative colleagues support that, but I try and be at least as ideologically consistent with that as I can.
What are your thoughts on how the medical marijuana program is functioning in Louisiana?
Well, I mean, I think the same as everybody else. The prices are too high. There's not enough participants, and I think the supply, at least being readily available to people, is restricted. So, I think that you need to have more participants. I think it needs to be more readily available. And you're talking about people who basically have doctors' recommendations to get it, right? They shouldn't have to be paying three times the black market rate in order to get it. It's cheaper for them just to get the card and then go get it from somewhere else, right? I don't think that is the right system. And I think that expanding that, especially if you have the recreational program, the medical one kind of becomes less significant, I think, for sure. But as long as it exists, I think you need to have a more expansive program, like Mississippi or some of our, other states that I think have more competition, that have lower prices, and I think have provided better products to their constituents.
In my mind, I kind of think of the medical program as the rich man's recreational, because it's not hard to get a referral.
Yeah, no,
if you could just afford
$50 in a phone call, right?
Yeah, and if we could just break through that and bring down prices, because pricing is a huge issue, because we all know insurance doesn't cover it, And if you have cancer, do you really want to drive an hour, to the pharmacy?
Yeah, it's not
to pick
available.
up?
There's only
there's some
the
things
current
going on.
licensees for the pharmacies is like what? There's 20, I think. I think there'll be
There
allowed.
was,
They'll
there
be
was
allowed
9,
20.
and then they allowed them to get each 3 substations under one license. So there could be potentially to have 40.
Okay.
Because there's 9 with a 10th one up for bid, which I think went to New Orleans.
Yeah, it was awarded in New
And
Orleans,
then
I think.
each license gets 3 satellite offices.
Oh,
So
okay. Yeah. I thought there was only. I thought they only allowed one additional one.
it's based on patient count.
So as those counts go
Right,
higher, they can possibly
then
have another
they could
one.
open up another one.
Yeah,
But
so I mean, I think at the same time, if you want to go get prescription opioids, right, you can get it. There's a CVS and a Walgreens and a Walmart on every block.
Yeah.
So the things that actually kill people, you can get everywhere. And then medical marijuana, though
you got to drive
we
an
allow
hour.
for, yeah, you gotta get your covered wagon and start the Oregon Trail in order to go find one.
Yeah. So do you think the medical industry was trying to shut down the hemp industry this year?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. So I really wasn't involved too much in that battle. Obviously, I think they look at it as competition because they serve a similar similar need, I think. So, anytime you have these kind of complementary products, I would say, people say, well, if the price of medical marijuana is so high, I can go and look for some, these lower levels of THC and some of these other products that are, hemp derived. And, I think some customers definitely go and look for that. And I think that makes sense. So, it's one of those things where if you have a captive market, you're always trying to use the government to squash competition. So to the extent you're competing it. A lot of times they tell me that they're competing against the black market, right? Which is true. They do compete against the black market. So, but honestly, I think that's why having, free markets, competitive regulation, I think is the best way to have, better products and lower prices for everybody.
So the medical program, I believe, is set to sunset January 1st, 2025.
Yeah.
So at that point, do you think they'll open it up to other growers?
I think this is a battle. This is a battle that happens in the legislature almost every year. Is that they want to allow other growers, they want to allow more licensees to, open the medical pharmacies. I don't think that's going to continue. I think that there will eventually be more growers allowed. I think there will eventually be more dispensary or pharmacy permits issued. I think it's just you're changing culture slowly, right? Which is part of the deal. Is inertia is probably the strongest force in politics. So that, the way things are, it's pretty difficult to change. And so I think over time they're going to start allowing more growers. I think they're going to allow a more permissive permitting environment for the dispensaries, but we're just not there today.
Yeah. I went to a few of the committee hearings when they were thinking about expanding it, and I could see heads nodding, in agreement. But then I heard comments that they're wanting to protect the 2 that have invested money in the state until they can recoup their money, which I wish they would think that way about the hemp industry. It would be nice to recoup our money before they try to shut us down. So I mean, there's definitely some good old boy protections going on with the monopoly that is really set up right now.
So this is Louisiana.
Yeah.
Edwin Edwards went to jail for selling casino licenses, right? So I mean, I think that at the end of the day, having a free market is a better way of running. Is a much better way of running the state. And so I don't think the state should be in the business of picking winners and losers, but they set a minimum level of qualifications. And they should open it up more broadly for sure. And I think that in the legislature and in the committees, it's it's honestly a new conversation. It used to be just a few years ago, marijuana was kind of a toxic word that, just getting the medical marijuana program established was very difficult. The reason there's 2 growers is because I think it was never going to happen. And then they said, well, we'll give Southern and LSU a license. Everybody loves Southern and LSU. And so like I said, when you're creating these things, you're trying to give them some sugar to swallow the medicine with, and it was like, hey, you got to support Southern and LSU, so that's why you got to vote for this medical program. And so that's where we're coming from. Where we're going, I think, is definitely more broad and more open, but you got a long way to go as far as changing these kind of hearts and minds of the politicians on, really what do their citizens want. And honestly, all these things, they're controlled by people. Like people vote for their legislators, people vote for their governor. If this is an issue for you, if you care about it, like go and get involved, vote for people, tell everyone about it, and that's how you change. Like, it can change overnight if you demand it. If you stay at home and don't vote and you don't tell anybody, then it's going to stay where it is.
Go vote.
So,
how hard was it to get your recreational bill out of committee?
Yeah, you know, the sheriff's association, the DA's association, both of them opposed it. It was definitely a lot of work. I mean, this is a whole new idea. I think the people that voted for it, including the Republicans that voted for it, you know, had to be comfortable that this is what their district and what the people that their constituents are, that they really supported it, which it's almost universal. The polling is very strong, that especially in, you know, more urban areas like Baton Rouge and, you know, St. Tammany even, you know, there's pretty strong support for this. I mean, you know, there's some areas of the state where it's maybe not the majority, but even then, so for example, like the Monroe area, you know, polling a couple of years ago was that even in the Monroe area, where it was probably the least supportive of legalizing recreational cannabis, it was still almost 50-50. So it's something where almost everybody's constituents are in the majority in favor of it. I think everybody's more afraid of that very vocal 10% or 20% that you know, believe, I think, some of the misinformation about it. I like to point out all the time, I was like, who do you think has more violent crime? You know, Louisiana or Colorado? I was like, we have significantly more violent crime than Colorado. I was like, who do you think has safer roads? You know, Louisiana or Colorado? It's just because Colorado is kind of the boogeyman of, you know, legalization of cannabis or marijuana. And, you know, we have something like 50% more highway deaths per capita than Colorado does. So if this was the cause, yeah, I mean, if marijuana legalization was the cause of all these problems, how come it's so, you know, how come there is absolutely no correlation between these things and, you know, the outcome? So anyway, I think to some extent you got to educate some of these people, which you may or may not be able to reach, on what the actual impacts of the policy are. And in reality, there's a reason that more and more states are legalizing it and none are going back, right? I think in general, citizens are happier in that kind of system. I mean, for example, Arizona legalized it years ago. Nobody ever says, oh my gosh, Arizona's falling apart now. Right. Everybody's moving to Arizona. So, and it's a relatively conservative state. You know, at the end of the day, the citizens did it through referendum. And I think in Louisiana, if we had a vote on it today, it would pass. I think so for sure.
So your bill from 21 that you got out of committee, it did not limit the amount of growers. And would you push for a bill similar going forward, or would you not support a bill that would limit the growers, and would you push to have it more of a free market?
Yeah, you know, I modeled that somewhat off of Oklahoma, which has a medical program, but really a kind of a wide open medical program, right? And I think some of the things that we've seen from Oklahoma is maybe it'd be slower to roll it out. I mean, not necessarily have a hard cap initially, but maybe roll it out so that, you know, you give X amount of licenses year one, X amount of licenses year two, X amount of licenses year three, and, you know, just kind of open it up gradually so that there's not some giant boom and bust cycle like we saw in Oklahoma. But you know, at the end of the day, you know, I don't want anybody having extraordinary profits because they're able to control entrance to the market, right? Mm-hmm. So really, it's going to be a question of, you know, what is the most responsible way in order to avoid a lot of the blowback that we saw in Oklahoma. But on the other side of that, I think is California, who really significantly limited the licenses and who could get them, and as a result, the black market flourished, and, you know, the supply basically remained in the black market. It wasn't such a situation where, you know, it really did a lot of good to legalize it, because, you know, you basically had drug dealers and cartels running the whole thing anyway.
Yeah, I believe it's a $5 billion legal market and $10 billion black market. So,
so
over-regulating.
Yeah, it's not the answer.
More to the black market.
It's not the answer, for sure. And so I think that you really want a situation where you just kind of responsibly and reasonably grow the legal market so that it is essentially a free market.
Yeah. So in a potential bill that you would sign for rec, would you support a clause in there that would support workers, you know, from not being denied a job if they tested positive for marijuana? I know this is kind of a hard question because you have, you know, state employees, federal employees, private employees.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly you should probably treat it like, you know, especially from the medical program, because we have the same problem with the medical marijuana currently, right? It's like, I think if you have a prescription or a recommendation from a doctor, I think you should treat it like you treat, any drug, any opioids. Like if you're on some kind of painkiller or whatever, to the extent it doesn't interfere with your job, and you're allowed to, whatever, continue to work with the doctor's recommendations. So, hey, look, I have this. I think that you should not, the state should not go in and say, well, the private employer cannot, I think the private employer should treat it basically the same as a recommendation, as a regular prescription. But for an employer who wants to say, hey, look, somebody's smoking marijuana, can I fire them? I don't want to get involved in that non-medical, in that non-medical relationship. So like if it's not it's not something that's been recommended by a doctor. If the employer wants the freedom to be able to choose that, and that's one of their conditions of employment, then they can do that. I think in my conversation with most employers, they don't do that now because it's almost, it's very difficult to find employees. And so like if that's essentially that's how you want to operate your business, I think, especially in a legalized recreational market, it's going to be very difficult for you to find capable employees when you say, hey, look, if you ever do have any, contact with marijuana, then I'm going to fire you if you test positive. Yeah. I think there'll probably be a few employers that do that. And I mean, maybe they'll do it for, some maybe federal, truck drivers or forklift operators, those kind of guys. At the same time, I think the federal laws will probably come into sharper focus, I think, in the next couple of years too, where they'll probably drop the requirements for those kind of strict marijuana compliance and stuff. Really, it should be focused. I think really, honestly, the law should focus on impairing. If they're impaired, you should never be impaired in operating these things. Not just, hey, do you test positive, which doesn't really indicate whether or not you're ever impaired.
And I know testing is getting better to where you could see how far back you smoked. I know they've been working on that for a while, and that's what's hard to do.
It's hard to tell. I mean, if you're not just assessing how impaired the person is, it's hard to come up with a definitive number. It's not like, blowing blood alcohol content, right? You don't have the same level of accuracy.
So this next question comes from my son and his friends. They're young, but they want to know where do you think the tax revenue should go to that would be generated from recreational cannabis? Where would you like to see it go?
Sure. I mean, honestly, like I said, dedicating the revenue is kind of complicated because when you dedicate it, you're basically tying the hands of, whatever your priorities are today, 10 years from now, are they going to be the same, right? I would say practically, if you want to get it passed, I think putting some into law enforcement who right now, they use these kind of fines and fees to kind of operate their budgets and stuff. I think putting some of that into law enforcement to kind of alleviate some of these concerns that it's going to make people less safe. It's like, well, if you're given, in my original bill, I think I put 20% to law enforcement and said, hey, let's use this to actually make people safer so that we kind of get past the argument of like, hey, this is going to make people unsafe, right? So not only are they going to save money by not having to enforce these laws that aren't really followed anyway, but physically allocating that money to them so that they are able to actually go out and catch, the fentanyl dealers and the carjackers and the murderers that everybody, hates and despises, that we can focus on those things. I think that's a good idea. I think putting some in, addiction services, I think that's a good place to put it. I think other states have done that as well. Drug education, putting it into some of that money into that. I think that's a good thing to do because you should, educate people on the risks of not just marijuana or cannabis, but anything, alcohol and cigarettes and all this other stuff. So I think putting into that. And then honestly, early child education is a great thing just because of the return on investment for state taxpayer. I think it's a great way to spend the money. At the same time, I don't want to dedicate too much of it when you're not directly correlated to some of the problems that it causes, right? So the more you dedicate, like I said, you're going to tie your hands for the years in the future, and that makes it just not the best policy, just because obviously your priorities can change, from year to year, and I think you got to be able to be somewhat flexible in what you're going to do with the money.
So off of those answers, so 20% to the sheriff's department or law enforcement. So if there's less arrests happening, then there's less people to process. Shouldn't their costs kind of go down? Shouldn't their imprisonments go down? Wouldn't that free up funds on that place? And
yeah, it does.
I would, while it's nice to offer that to them, I feel their cost would go down and maybe more money go to addiction recovery, trying to help this opioid epidemic and get fentanyl off the street and help those that were affected so drastically by it. That's just my input on it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with
you
you.
to change your mind on
No,
that.
I mean, I don't. Like I said, all these things are. It's all negotiable. I'll tell you the breakdown is going to be is whatever I get to the legislature. That's what it is. You know. So.
And you won't be the one writing the bill.
Yeah, a legislator will be carrying the bill. Absolutely. And so I think that at the end of the day, whatever, I had this argument on the floor of the House, and I was like, listen, we can put it all in a barrel and burn it, and we will still be better off than having it all go to drug dealers or drug cartels, right? Yeah. And so that was what the big debate was on the floor of the House, was like, well, where are you going to spend this money? Well, let's argue about that. And I was like, listen, at the end of the day, this is money that we're not collecting right now if we don't legalize it. And I was like, putting it all in a barrel and burning it would be we'd be all better off, because at least then it's not going to drug dealers or drug cartels, right? Yeah. And so I think that that's going to be a discussion of where is it going to go. And I think you got to target some of it to, the harms related to it, and I think law enforcement, that helps a little bit. I think addiction services, I think that helps. And then some of these other things I think are just going to be wherever we can get through the legislature.
Maybe some helping getting expungements for those that were arrested. I know there's always,
there's
calls for that.
Well, the criminal justice system in general is significantly underfunded, and we use really fines and fees on people that, you get traffic tickets and stuff like that to really fund our whole justice system, which, it might be good to say, hey, let's take some of that money, which I think was one of the bills brought this last year, this previous session, was to say, hey, let's use some of this money to kind of provide some money to the justice system so we can get the kind of swift and speedy justice and, fair justice that I think everybody wants, versus saying like, hey, if you're poor, you're going to get thrown in jail until you can make bail, and you pay all your fines and fees for your traffic tickets, or else we're going to throw you in jail too. It's not really the best system for the citizens.
Yeah. So you're a family man. What would you say to those that are skeptical in saying that, it would destroy our youth, cannabis?
Yeah. So I mean, I would say, at the end of the day, if your kid's going to smoke marijuana or do whatever, I think that's your responsibility as a parent to talk to them about it. I think the risk of them doing that exists whether it's legal or not. And at the same time, like for me as a parent, I'll tell my kids, hey, look, don't smoke, don't do any kind of drugs, don't drink alcohol, whatever. When you're adult, you're 21 or whatever, you make your own choices, you're a big boy now. But I would be more comforted by the fact knowing that if he bought something that was safe and regulated and packaged and said exactly what was in it and they knew where they got it from, I would feel better as a parent knowing that that was the case, versus they went to a drug dealer and they bought something from the street, something off the street that could be God knows what from God knows where, right? And I mean, I think that is a significantly greater problem. And then plus you're interacting with drug dealers who are obviously not the most, they're not the most amenable of people, and they're dealing in the black market. They can't exactly call the cops if something goes wrong, right? So that's why there's so much violence associated with it. So I think from a parental perspective, you're much better off having it being safe and regulated versus a black market that's run by criminals. And I think that's where you see why is violent crime so much lower in Colorado. I think maybe that's a reason why. You have this significantly reduced black market, at least in the the domestic market for cannabis. I think that helps.
That's a great answer, and I wouldn't have thought that you would have come from that direction on that answer, but I think that would help a lot of parents kind of make their way through.
Yeah, it's a legitimate concern, because I think you think, hey, well, my kids get alcohol, and is it better that way? I mean, the truth is, we had prohibition of alcohol, and it resulted in significant death and loss of life and conflict.
Poison from alcohol.
And also, exactly. Right. And the collateral damage from having it be bootleg alcohol, right? It's the exact same thing. And so when you're looking at what is better, we made that decision with alcohol a long time ago because it really was not a good policy. We've kept the same policy with marijuana, and I don't think that it's been very successful, and it's suffers from similar challenges.
So how do we repair the damages caused to families for those that were incarcerated from cannabis? That's an open-ended question, but there are people that have spent years in prison.
There's people buried in Angola for marijuana possession. I mean, that's the truth. I think you got to change the law. We've done that to some extent. We criminalized at least the small, simple possession of marijuana. That was just done 2 years ago. It could have been a felony prosecution. It still can be, I think, for multiple offenses. Like the fourth simple possession offense can still be a felony, I think. So I think you get rid of those laws, obviously. The people that have been convicted. Most of them are not in jail now in Louisiana. There's not really anybody there in jail for simple possession. I think allowing the expungements and helping to fund the expungements of people that got convicted of things like simple possession, not distribution, but just the possession. I think that makes sense, so that you free them up from things like job searches and apartment searches and stuff like that. Kind of help them get their life back together. But honestly, some of it is just stop digging the hole, which is stop convicting people of possession charges to begin with, and really, like I said, get rid of the black market and make it above board so that you don't have to worry about those things.
Do you think cannabis will ever be accepted as sociably as alcohol is in Louisiana, and should it be?
Yeah, I think it's almost a generational thing. I mean, I think especially the kids that are, I'm 37. I think the kids that are maybe a generation or so younger than me, I mean, they look at alcohol almost as kind of like, this is a poison you're putting in your body that causes all these kind of effects, kills people all the time. I mean, you read the paper every day as some drunk driver, kills themselves, their family, or somebody else. That doesn't really happen with cannabis. I mean, I think that it's not that there's no negative effects, but I think, the next day, most people don't go and say, had a gummy yesterday. I've never heard this. Maybe that exists, but I've never heard anybody say, hey, I took a gummy yesterday and now I'm just going to lay on the couch all day because I'm so hungover. But alcohol has serious negative effects, and I think that the younger generations kind of look at it that way. I haven't mentioned this, but I've never even used marijuana. I don't smoke it, never have. I was an Eagle Scout, but I just look at it from an economic and a policy perspective that it's the better policy. But I think really the younger generation are definitely more open to it. I think they look at alcohol more on the lines of this has much greater negative health consequences. I think maybe much more negative societal consequences than cannabis does.
You're right.
And so, as obviously as they grow up, that becomes the majority of the population who feels that way.
That's some good points. Do you think cannabis would boost the tourism in Louisiana?
Oh yeah, I mean, if I don't know if you've been to New Orleans recently. I mean, it's legal for all intents and purposes. It's really just, do they advertise on the flyers that it's legal? No, but I mean, like, it's available everywhere. And so really, I think you use it from a couple of angles, right? So one is people would come here, especially from our neighboring states. If it's illegal, essentially, or restricted in Texas or these other southern states that aren't going to legalize recreational marijuana anytime soon. New Orleans is a giant attraction and, a regional destination for people. Having that being available, I think, would significantly increase tourism. I think also is that you're going to have tax money available, and in my initial bill, I put a lot of that, half of the tax money went to the locals to spend, right? So you can use it cleaning up the streets, like, getting maybe all the homeless people off the streets, giving them some kind of drug addiction treatment so that they're not there kind of dragging down the rest of the area. And I think if you have an additional source of tax revenue, you have the ability to clean some of these things up, which would kind of be a virtuous cycle, right? And trying to improve everything.
Yeah. Every city I've driven in Colorado, all the sidewalks are brand new, the downtowns are remodeled, schools are brand new. I mean, really,
Colorado makes there's a significant amount of revenue from it.
Yeah.
Significant amount of revenue.
Yeah. If you become governor, how long do you think it would take to implement this into, I know it has to go through legislation and passed. Do you foresee certain legislators willing to maybe take up your bill that made it out of committee and adopt it and try to get it in the first session as you
Yeah, I don't know if the first session, we maybe bring that in the first session. I don't know if it would pass in the first session. Maybe. I would support it, and I would do everything I can. I think there's a lot of, personally, I think there's a lot of other pressing issues that would have to be addressed. Such as the tax structure, the education, insurance, homeowners insurance is a huge crisis that we're going through. I think some of those things, you only really get a few shots, every year on some big issues that you could take on. So marijuana is not going to be on the top of that list for me. But I think in maybe the second term, especially when you can pass the tax that accompanies it at the same time, I think that would probably be the most likely time to do it, would be probably in the second year when you can pass the accompanying tax so that you can kind of put all the pieces in place. And, I think that would probably be the most likely time for that to happen. You could also do it as a constitutional amendment. The constitutional amendment kind of pushes it off. It's a higher bar in each chamber, but it just gives it to the people. Say, hey, look, do you think that legalization is something that we should go to? and it would put in the Constitution, which I'm not necessarily in favor of, but it's the only way that you can really make it a referendum, right? Is that you give people the option to vote. So, your legislature, your local legislature doesn't have to say, hey, I support marijuana legalization, which people will be mad about, but they can say, listen, I gave you the vote. If you don't like it, go vote against it, right? If you do, then go out and vote for it. And I think that would be another option to put it forward to people.
We're going to have to work on that answer. I need it first year.
I mean, like I said, I think that I definitely wouldn't.
Because it solves some of the problems. The tax revenue would help with some of those other issues. So you need to marry them. We're going to have to find a way to marry that. What would the qualification factors for someone who wants to participate in the recreational cannabis industry? What would the qualifications be in your bill, or a bill that you would want to sign?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they would be relatively, relatively lax. I don't think you want to restrict people too much. I mean,
right.
I would say similar to whatever the permit is for alcohol, for alcohol distribute. If you're, your ATC permit for a bar or whatever, I think it would be something similar to that.
It's funny you bring that up, because I made that point in a meeting last year, that the manufacturer's license to distill or to make wine, I think, is only $1,000. And it was in regards to Miss Newell's bill. I think she was wanting to charge like $50,000 for a license.
Oh yeah.
And I was just trying to make that comparison. And
make it more reasonable.
Yeah, and they were like, "Well, this is nothing like alcohol," and of course it's not. But
yeah, I mean, it is somewhat different, I think, but mostly I think it's somewhat different in, just kind of where it is societally versus the harm caused by cannabis. I mean, that's the reality. So,
and you and I were talking before we started this about Mississippi and how they have a tiered system where.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. I mean, I think that moving away from what Oklahoma did, which is kind of the model from my previous legislation in 2021, it's like I think you definitely need to have it where the smaller fish pay a smaller fee and the big fish pay a big fee, and I think that's just when you're looking at the regulatory oversight involved, like how many inspectors are going to have to go out there, like how much time are they going to have to spend. It's definitely a bigger burden on the bigger the bigger producers.
Who do you know that's benefited from cannabis?
It's funny, when you're a Republican who brings the first bill to legalize marijuana, how many Republicans come out to you and say, you know what, I've supported this forever. I couldn't believe it when Nixon made this illegal. Created this war on drugs in the 70s. And I mean, you got 75-year-old bankers who are like, look, this is the best thing, you got to keep fighting for this. It's really important. And, the Republicans and the older generation, hey, we're really behind this too. It's not just a thing. So I've had a lot of people come to me and say, hey, look, like I had cancer, and the only thing that got me through chemo was, marijuana. That was the only thing that saved me. And a lot of them say, hey, I was 100% against it until my son said, hey, look, you're struggling with chemo. Why don't you go try this? I've had a lot of older people too that had pain problems. They were on opioids. They suffered from opioid addiction as a result of some kind of pain issue. And they got off of the opioids and they used, marijuana or something to kind of alleviate their pain. So I've heard all these stories from all over the state as a result of authoring this bill in 2021. So there's definitely a much broader, I think a much broader understanding of the benefits of it. And like I said, I tell people all the time, like alcohol and cigarettes are both legal. No doctors recommend that people go out and smoke and drink. It doesn't happen.
They used to.
Yeah, in the 60s when they said, hey, go smoke cigarettes, you'll have smaller babies, right? It'll help you relax. But like for cannabis, you have thousands of recommendations every day, not just in Louisiana, but all over the country, of doctors saying, hey, this will actually improve your health, right? So it is somewhat different that way. And I think that that's a good perspective for people to have is if this is really as harmful as some people paint it as, you wouldn't have thousands of doctors every day recommending to their patients that it'll make them better. And that's, I think, an important thing to keep in perspective.
So you actually haven't had anyone like really close to you that has benefited? Yeah.
No. I mean, honestly,
when you do, you appreciate it even more.
Yeah.
It really will hit you because my dad had cancer last year. A lot of people around me, and plus I get calls all the time, thanking us for what we do, and so it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's.
I don't want you to have any.
Yeah, I don't want it. Don't put that on me. Yeah, no.
I don't want you to have that.
But I have heard a lot of those stories, and it really surprises me. Some of the people that come out. I mean, and these are older Republicans who this is almost something. This is something that they've had to repress probably for a long time.
They feel the floodgates.
Yeah, they're just like, hey, look, like I'm glad someone's out there saying that who thinks like me because this is necessary.
Yeah. Well, you answered this one. Have you ever used cannabis?
I've never used it. Never once.
I got some gummies in my car.
It's okay.
You sure?
I'm sure, yes.
I mean, it's like a glass of wine, but without the hangover.
That's right. I understand. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it gives me a unique position, right?
Yeah.
Is that I can advocate for this not from my personal, not because of some personal issue I have or some personal belief that I have, but really as a policy. I think that this is better for everybody,
right.
And so I think it gives me a good position to be in to advocate for it because personally, it doesn't bother one way or the other. It's not going to impact my life, and I was like, but I can say from a society perspective, from a state perspective, I think that it's better for the citizens.
So the old saying, the younger vote doesn't count. If you could talk to the younger people watching this video right now, tell them to, give them your speech right now and your spiel to go out and vote and make a difference.
Sure. Yeah. No. So I mean, I think, Louisiana has had challenges forever. Like I said, probably for 100 years since Huey Long, we've basically been at the bottom. And there's a lot of candidates in this race. You got about 7 people running right now. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you like the status quo, if you like continuously losing people. If you like cannabis being illegal forever, at the end of the day, if you want that to be the case, you can vote for anybody else. You vote any other candidate, doesn't matter which one, and you will have the status quo. I guarantee you. And I was like, but if you would like to see significant changes in the state, as I said earlier, if you would like to get the 4 years of your life back and a 33% raise just to have Louisiana be average, if you would like to have more reasonable laws on cannabis, I was like, I'm your only choice. There's nowhere else to go. And so you're going to have to be motivated, though. You got to go vote. You got to convince all your friends and your family to go vote, and you got to, actually care and get involved because it's not going to happen on accident. And I think that's one of the things where, my generation and the, younger people, we kind of look at politics as like, this is my grandpa's game, right? And it's like, well, when it's your grandpa's game and you get your grandpa's rules. And, if you don't show up, that's what you're going to keep. And so I think Louisiana has significant opportunity to not just catch up to our southern neighbors, but I think to exceed them. But it's really going to take a revolution to do that. It's going to take a complete abandonment of the status quo, which is really what I represent. And that's going to be on the ballot on October 14th. And I would appreciate your vote. I appreciate your support. And, do everything you can in order to help us win.
When would the last day to register to vote be?
I'm not sure. Maybe like a month before, something like that. Usually it's about a month, I think, out from the election.
Okay.
So
that's an important
it's going to probably be in September. Yeah, it's probably going to be in like September or something. So, go register to vote and definitely show up to vote.
All right. Well, Richard.
Well, no, I appreciate it, Blaine.
It was great talking. We're going to definitely do it again. We're throwing our support behind you, and we appreciate you coming out to Lafayette and visiting and trying to start this grassroots movement. And thank you.
No, thanks for having me.
All right.